the limited, much too small official government boundary for the cockpit country. They're not yet been formalized, not yet been gazetted. And at the opening of Parliament a couple of weeks ago, that was listed as one of government priorities. But of course, we're worried that they want to gazette the limited boundary. So that's something that perhaps we need to react to. And one person has suggested that is definitely something that we should campaign on, because once it's been gazetted, the smaller area, it will be then much harder to, to expand it. So that could be a focus. But I'll still continue to work on trying to make, really get us together, because a couple of the groups have actually said it would be good if the groups tend not to talk to each other that much. I mean, I'm sure they do to some extent, but the idea of having a more united approach, especially with CLS and so on involved, it could make a difference.
Yeah, that sounds like a positive way forward. Any questions to Steve and Paul on cockpit situation? No. Okay. So we'll move on to our publication, the Death on the Frontier. This is about the border control and migration workers movement bill that the Conservative government is trying to push through. Certain those who are keeping up with it have known that it's in it's passing through the Lords now. The Lords itself, there's a lot of changes they want to do to it, but that's not binding, because when it goes back to Parliament, they can overturn what the amendments the Lords have put in. But anyway, we'll discuss that as we go along, I suppose, or it'll be mentioned within the contributions from the three authors of this bulletin. But for the start, we'll go over to Steve, who will be our first speaker on this bulletin. Okay, Steve, you've got the floor again.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. What I was trying to do for my contribution to this was to add a historical look at how border controls, immigration controls, and the like have affected the workers' movement, and how the workers' movement internationally has reacted, both positively from our point of view and negatively from our point of view, and so on. But to start, I think last week has seen two examples of the structural racism of border control. The Dominican Republic authorities, who have long been notorious for their oppression of people of African heritage, has started to construct a wall to close the border between the Dominican Republic and neighbouring Haiti. And this will actually concretely institutionalize the racism they seek to generate against both immigrants from Haiti and Dominican citizens of African descent. The other thing that I think has come up this week, the war in Ukraine has produced thousands of refugees. The Polish and Hungarian governments have been seeking praise and no doubt funding for receiving many of these. What's much less commendable is the fact that several thousand African, Indian, and Middle Eastern students who've been studying in the Ukraine have been denied entry and have been left to their fate in the Ukraine. So that's a couple of things in the news at the moment that I think are particularly offensive, really. But the official discussion about immigration concentrates on the needs of the economy and the so-called labour market. In other words, the matters observed from the point of view of the employing class. Caribbean Labour Solidarity, on the other hand, wants to analyse the situation from a working class standpoint. And this has led us to the conclusion that workers' organisations should welcome migrant workers and concentrate on uniting all workers to oppose capitalism. To Today, the world's in crisis with poverty, famine and war, forcing whole populations to seek a new life in richer areas of the world. Meanwhile, hard militarised borders, such as the Mediterranean, the English Channel and the Arizona Desert, are claiming thousands of lives every year. And we also have to recognise that much of this migration is caused by the detrimental effects of climate change. So anyway, historically speaking, despite the widespread belief that modern nations represent historical peoples within their own territory, the notion that states should have defined borders only has its origins as recently as 1648, with the Peace of Westphalia at the end of the 30 Years' War. And I would argue that today the system is in crisis with poverty, famine and war forcing whole populations to seek a new life in richer areas of the world, and the hard militarised borders claiming thousands of lives every year. Much of this migration, as I've said already, is caused by climate change. And while individual nation states have control over extraction and emissions within their borders, it'll be impossible to take the necessary steps to control global warming. But right, historically speaking, in 1882, with the support of the American Federation of Labour, the United States Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. The United States Socialist Party proposed a motion at the Stuttgart Congress of the Social International, calling for the restriction of the immigration of backward races. In response to this, the German Social Democratic Party supported a motion to campaign for abolition of all restrictions that prevent those of particular nations or races from residing in a country, or which exclude them from, or prevent the exercise of, the social, political and economic rights of the nationals. This resolution affirmed that the only way to overcome the problems caused by immigration was through organising the immigrants and through securing legislation granting them equal political and economic rights. However, once in office, following the defeat of the post-war revolutionary wave, the German Social Democratic government then accepted the policy of primacy of nationals, so that foreigners could be hired only when no German workers were available. These measures helped undermine organised labour by incorporating the unions into the machinery of nationalist discrimination and by strengthening the line of demarcation between foreign workers and citizens. And a fat lot of good it did the Social Democratic Party bureaucrats, because they were rounded up by the patriotic Nazis in 1933, along with everybody else. One of the accusations against immigrant labour is that they undercut the wages of the workers who are native-born citizens, either by working for low wages or by strike breaking. This argument was used in support of the anti-alien resolution at the 1895 TUC conference in Cardiff. There was a robust response from a number of predominantly Jewish trade union organisations in the form of a pamphlet entitled "A Voice from the Aliens" about the anti-alien resolution of the Cardiff Trade Union Congress. And it was launched at a mass meeting in London, addressed by Eleanor Marx, Ben Tillett and Peter Kropotkin. I think that would have been a meeting to be at. This pamphlet said, define the situation as that all alien exploiters, swindlers, blacklegs, drunkards, idlers of all sorts who have money are welcomed here, but that skillful, industrious, honest working men who have been out of work for a long time and therefore have no money shall be prohibited from coming here. Well, you might say, what's changed? Immigration restriction was first introduced in Britain in 1905, followed by a campaign in the yellow press in which the term traitors figured predominantly, and a campaign of anti-Semitic violence which rocked the East End of London. However, in the debate in Parliament, John Burns argued that the way to stop sweated labour was through regulation of hours and the abolition of subcontracting. If we go back to the United States of America, we see the roots of the defeat of the 1919 US steel strike and the division of US citizens into the more in the more skilled trades from the mainly immigrant unskilled workers, and the effective of this nativist patriotism undermined solidarity. And compare this with the success of the Lawrence textile strike of 1912, led by the industrial workers of the world, when they distributed its propaganda in 16 separate languages to ensure the unity of all the of the workers. So, you know, do migrant workers cause wages to fall for native-born citizens? We see that throughout history, it's very often been those very immigrants who have rejuvenated the labour movement in the land of their adoption. For example, the strikes by the predominantly Irish dockers and matchwomen in London during the 1880s and 90s won wage rises and inspired a wave of industrial militancy that led to rising standards of living for both native British workers and immigrants alike. In some cases, British trade unions, despite some fine words from the Trade Union Congress, colluded with employers to keep Black and Asian workers as second-class industrial citizens. For example, the refusal of the Bristol bus crews to accept recruitment of Black conductors, or the betrayal of strikes such as the Mansfield Hosiery or Stanmore Engineering, are examples of this scandalous behaviour. The pattern that emerges is one where class collaborationist trade union organisations who don't provide adequate representation for their white members would permit racist practices to continue, while those who sought to build united militant organisations that would take up the grievances of all workers, regardless of ethnic origin, were much more successful. And there's in the face of the racism represented by Peter Griffiths in Smethwick, which some of us are old enough to remember, the Indian Workers Association organised the predominantly Punjabi workforce in the Birmingham factory in Smethwick into a militant union organisation. And some of the leadership of that Indian Workers Association in the West Midlands have been specially sent over by communist organisations in India to assist with the task of organising these migrant workers. So workplace solidarity proved to be a significant step in overcoming racial prejudice in many white workers, particularly where they were involved in joint strikes. The inspirational effect of Jayad bin Desai and the Grunwick strikers has become legendary. She said, "We have shown that workers like us, new to these shores, will never accept being treated without dignity or respect. We have also shown that white workers will support us." Going back a little, a resolution of the 1908 Congress of the French Trade Union Federation, the CGT, states, "In view of the fact that geographical frontiers can be modified at the whim of the possessing classes, workers recognise only economic frontiers, those separating the two enemy classes, the working class and the capitalist class." Contrast this with Len McCluskey recently quoting Marx to justify immigration control. He said, Karl Marx identified long ago in 1867, a study of the struggle waged by the British working class reveals that in order to oppose their workers, the employers either bring in workers from abroad or else transfer manufacture to countries where there is a cheap labour force. McCluskey finishes there, but Marx himself carried on to say, given this state of affairs, if the working class wishes to continue its struggle with some chance of success, the national organisations must become international. The second sentence casts the first in a completely different light and equates Marx's sentiments much more closely with the IWW and the CGT than with the jingo socialists of the British TUC and the American Federation of Labour. Now, the United States of America gained control of the area within its self-proclaimed borders by a war of genocide against the native inhabitants. And in order to populate this territory, encouraged one of the only examples of state-sponsored mass free movement of labour in history. European settlers were allowed to colonise the land vacated by the extermination of the so-called Indians. The Indian Wars came to an end with the massacre at Wounded Knee and the murder of Sitting Bull in 1890. And the first major restriction on immigration from Europe to the USA came the following year with the 1891 Immigration Act. While nearly all borders are created by war, the borders in the colonial empires were created both by invasion and by inter-imperialist rivalries. The Treaty of Berlin of 1884 divided up Africa. The period immediately after the First World War saw the Middle East divided by the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Balfour Declaration, with no consideration for local political structures, languages, conditions, and so on. These arbitrary boundaries are maintained in the face of any logic or justice by the United Nations. Just as the post-colonial Third World has maintained the old imperial boundaries, imperialist property relations have also, with few exceptions, been maintained. So when the new ruling class of the post-colonial states sought to gain admittance to the world capitalist pork barrel, they maintained these same borders. And I could say there have been 20 of Hastings Banda for every one of Patrice Lumumba. Those they can't suborn, they kill. Equally, the United Nations system maintains the racist oppression of many nations without states, the Kurds and Armenians, Palestine, Western Sahara. Migrants from artificial nation states, the remnants of European colonialism, are then denied the right to move, to escape the consequences of the boundaries that Europe left behind. Hard borders exist as much to prevent people from leaving their country of origin as to prevent their arrival elsewhere. Trump's wall is only partly about demagogic appeals to the apparent self-interest of demoralized US workers. It's just as much intended to keep poor Mexican workers south of the border, where their low wages and poor conditions can be exploited by US big business. The increasing number of deaths of migrants at dangerous border crossings and perilous sea journeys serves as a dreadful warning to the would-be immigrants, thereby helping to maintain cheap labour regimes in the Third World. And the two aren't contradictory. Those who arrive without papers or with limited work permits are potential cheap labour, while those who are enclosed in their country of birth provide a different pool of cheap labour. I would argue that the key to breaking this cycle is cross-border internationalist workers' organisation that would fight for a worldwide minimum wage, a worldwide maximum hours of work with parity with the best available. I mean, why should a Haitian or a Jamaican worker be expected to have a standard of living so much lower than the norm in Europe? But with the planet being destroyed by climate change, the situation has become critical. While climate change is global, the solutions are currently bounded by state borders. Because the climate is global, individual nation states alone cannot prevent environmental change. Yet the 1992 Rio Conference stated, states have the sovereign right to exploit their own resources pursuant to their own environmental and development policies. Corporations operate across borders, while regulations and workers are contained by them. So as long as oil and mineral extraction, as well as the resulting pollution, is controlled by corporations unbounded by borders and protected by free trade, the fate of the environment will rest with these corporations. The structural violence of borders is not only seen in the victims of drowning in the English Channel or heat stroke in the Arizona desert. Borders and migration control will also concentrate the negative impact of climate change in more vulnerable places, such as the Bay of Bengal, such as the Caribbean, while at the same time containing the people most affected in those areas, containing them within those areas. Presently, the Caribbean islands face one of the worst threats of flooding from sea level rises and more violent hurricanes. At the same time, Caribbean victims of climate change are denied the right to migrate out of the threatened region. All this illustrates the fatuous nature of European governments talking piously of reducing their internal inputs of greenhouse gases, while their capitalists are busy exporting production to other parts of the world where they can pollute at their leisure. The actual volume of CO2 emitted doesn't respect borders. capitalist profit depends in large part on the mobility of production, forever seeking cheaper sources of labour power, which in turn depend on fossil extraction. Thus, any attempt to restrict global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade will necessitate severe restrictions on free movement of capital. Currently, the vast majority of people who are forced to migrate do so because of wars and invasion, persecution by progressive right-wing regimes, and cuts in public expenditure, privatization, and other poverty-inducing measures enforced by the World Bank and other agencies of the West. I saw a placard on a recent anti-racist demonstration saying, "We are here because you were there." Of course, it would be better if people were not forced by the actions of the rich and their governments and corporations to take the drastic and often painful step of migrating. There's perhaps one humane way to reduce the need to migrate. This is for rich countries to stop making wars, to stop stealing the wealth of the rest of the world, and to stop destroying the climate. No one should be trapped in places where they are in danger. All of us should have the basic human right of free movement, the freedom to decide for ourselves where we wish to live and work, no matter what our national origins. Kato Tokijaro, who was the delegate of the Japanese Socialist Party to that 1907 Stuttgart Congress that of which I spoke earlier, said, "It is the duty of socialists to welcome these poor brothers, to defend them, and together with them to fight capitalism. The founders of socialism, above all Karl Marx, did not address themselves to individual countries, but to all humanity. Internationalism is inscribed on our banner." So to finish, I would just conclude by saying, from a working class point of view, I would argue we should not be calling for any restrictions on migration, but rather fighting to place the maximum restrictions on capital. Thank you.
Well done, Steve. For the next contribution from Nadine. Well, Nadine, the floor is yours. We carry straight on. Any questions, please write your questions down. We'll have the question after the three speakers have spoken. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Frank. I'm just going to make a brief contribution about the Nationality and Borders Bill, following on from what Steve has said. And they're going to talk about the progress of that bill. And then I'm going to add a bit about Ukraine. Steve's given us a very good historical analysis of what happens with immigration. And I'd concentrate in my contribution to the pamphlet in more recent times, and certainly, particularly in the Tony Blair time, there were constantly, practically every year, an asylum or a migration bill, which made people and the media think there was a real problem about asylum seekers and migrants. It really stirred up the inherent racism that exists in England. And this Nationality and Borders Bill is really a culmination of many decades of the tightening of restrictions. I would agree with Steve that the restrictions are to do with racism. They're also to do with the employers trying to control the economy and international finance trying to control the economy. And what they do is the old British divide and rule policy. So they have stirred up the British workforce to believe that migrants are taking their jobs and undercutting their wages. Now, in reality, the UK has a very, very tightly controlled migration system. They already have a points-based system, despite what is said by the Tories. And the only way, as many of you will know, you can get into the UK is as a close family member, a student, limited types of worker, or a business person. And even then, you have to meet very stringent financial and other conditions. So we do not have a welcoming place for migration. And we do not have thousands of people coming in here. But on that myth is built the need for further control. And in my view, as a former immigration barrister and judge, the Nationality and Borders Bill is just a further attempt to demonize anybody who wants to come here. There's been a lot of emphasis, quite rightly, on the clause which deals with giving people deportation orders without notice. But the sad thing is, has been missed by the media, we already have in Section 40 of the British Nationality Act a power to deport people who have a second nationality. This is not a new procedure. All that's concluded in this bill is that you can actually do it without giving the person notice. The bulk of the Nationality and Borders Bill is all about refugees, because refugees remained the only slightly more open way of entering the country. Because in international law, if you actually enter a country, even without a leave to do so, the United Kingdom has obligation in international law to actually look at your claim for asylum. They got round the incipient racism here by creating a special status of temporary permission. So they didn't let refugees come in with leave to enter. They gave them temporary permission, but it meant they could actually enter and wait here until their application was determined. What they've done in this bill is remove that right to enter, so that anybody who arrives here, physically arrives in the country as an asylum seeker, is deemed to be unlawful. And on the back of that, you have a whole host of other things. Not only are you potentially criminalized, but you will not have the, albeit meager, dispersal rights now to be dispersed to accommodation and have some, be at least supported to a certain extent by the state. Even if you manage to show them that you're entitled to asylum, and some 80% of people coming across the channel at the moment get asylum. But to try and put people off coming, in the future, if you cross over the channel, i.e. you don't have leave to enter before you leave France, and you arrive here, you will at best become a second-class refugee. You won't be entitled to the same accommodation rights or support rights. You will not be able to bring any family member. At the moment, if you become a refugee and recognize a refugee, you can bring your wife and your children. In the future, you'll be able to bring nobody to join you. And most types of support will be cut off from you. So you'll be a second-class kind of refugee. This is unique. The UK is very much an outlier. Nobody else in the world, even very, very poor states, actually create second-class refugees in this way. Now, there have been, it's correct to say, there have been some wins in the House of Lords. Most of the really bad and the worst parts of the bill have been overturned in the House of Lords, and mostly they were overturned at best by some like 2008 to 155 votes. That's usually late evening, because what they're doing, like they did with the policing bill, is they are listing the Nationality and Immigration Bill for quite late in the day. So by the time you get to 3 or 4 in the morning, the votes go down to about 83 to 76. And people who've watched UK Parliament, which has become a very popular channel, I'm told, you'll see quite elderly people like Alf Dubs remaining on his feet at 3 or 4 in the morning to try and defend migrants' rights. So at the moment, a lot of the very bad things about criminalising entry, about not letting you bring in children, letting unaccompanied minors come in a kind of quota system, have been passed by the House of Lords, a mixture mainly of lords who are hereditary lords, crossbenchers, bishops, a handful of Labour Party lords, not many, and the Lib Dems, are very strong. But the problem is, as Frank mentioned, when it goes back to the Commons do not need to accept those amendments. And I take a pessimistic view, like in the policing bill. I think it's unlikely the Commons will accept many, even in the light of the Ukrainian crisis, which I'm going to come on to. I think it's possible that Lord Dobbs's amendment about unaccompanied children being a quota, I think it's possible that will actually stick, because it would be quite an easy way for the Tories to show they were being sympathetic, because it is quite a low quota. I can't see personally many more things going through. Now, of course, the Lords haven't finished with the bill. They've got another day of report stage. And in that report stage are some very useful and important amendments, particularly about children. Now, one of the really bad proposals is that they always claim that children aren't children when they're from abroad. Over 50% of children get their age disputed, and they're put in adult accommodation whilst they resolve it. They're going further now. They're going to set up a National Age Assessment Board, which is outside the child protection system, which will be staffed by social workers employed by the Home Office. And they're going to use new kind of scientific methodology. At the moment, lots of scientific methodology like X-rays is blocked by nearly all our medical associations and royal colleges. So they've dreamt up a new one, which is to do with DNA, which is completely untested and is not thought to be very, in any way reliable. And in the bill, it just said we are thinking about using other methodologies. That is the methodology, DNA testing, which is a very, very unreliable way of testing age. There's also a slew of other parts of the bill which deal with human trafficking. So despite them saying that this bill is all to do with stopping human trafficking, they're actually taking away a huge amount of rights from people who may be trafficked, make it much more difficult for them to prove their case. At the same time, they are taking away a lot of legal procedures used by judges, where they still retain discretion. And I would probably say this as an ex-judge, but judges do actually stand up for rights, or some judges stand up for rights. But they're going to really hobble their ability by removing discretion. It's very much in line with the proposal for their new Bill of Rights and to do with judicial review. They are trying to stop judges having discretion, and they are trying to overturn decades of Supreme Court decisions. And these are people who have absolutely no legal qualifications. Priti Patel and the people she employs at the Home Office do not understand the law, the complex law, and they just want to make sure that judges can't, in their ways, side with migrants. So I hope that some of the amendments do last in the House of Commons. There's a chance a few might because of the ongoing situation. And just one last word in the bill, that the Home Office say we're going to have safe routes to enter because we're going to give people settlement. They mean they're going to cherry pick people who are in refugee camps. Now, the numbers of people that have been helped in this way in the last few years is quite staggering. So between 2016 and 2020, the UK gave settlement to some 23,000 people from camps near Syria, a few in Africa. In those same years, 157,000 individuals claimed asylum. There's no equivalence between the settlement they're proposing and the asylum seekers who actually exist, of which at the moment 80% are entitled to entry and asylum. So it's quite staggering what is happening. We're just going to say a little bit about Ukraine, if I can, Frank. There is a lot of discussion about many Black people being turned back on the Ukrainian, particularly the Ukrainian-Polish border. And it's undoubtedly, Poland is an extremely bad place to be Black or to be Roma. There is chaos at that, but the majority of those people are students. There's some 80,000 students thought to be in Ukraine or were in Ukraine. 50% of those are Indians, and the Indian government seems to manage to extract more of their students than anybody else. But clearly those students do not have any rights at the moment. And partly that's because people may know there's a Schengen system throughout Europe, which allows free movement between European countries. The UK was never in that system. But Ukraine is in that system to a certain extent. They are allowed to cross over the borders into Europe for 90 days at least. So those Ukrainians with a Ukrainian passport are being just waved through, which makes the situation for the Black students even worse, which means they're then being put in another queue because they aren't entitled to go into the Schengen system of Europe. And then they're not even being processed then. There are bodies in the UK which are working on this, like the Fundamental Rights Agency, who've done a lot for Roma and also anti-racist moves. And they are trying to work with the people at the border to try and get those Black people through, and so they can be picked up by their countries and give some shelter. But I don't know how that's going to mean. It's chaos at the border, so it's going to be difficult. There is also an element of Russian disinformation, which isn't helping the situation at all, because when people try and go to the borders, some of those Black students and their community have been given the wrong information by some of the Russian bots about where to go. Because if you know much about Europe, there are, of the countries that border on Ukraine, you certainly would want to avoid Poland and Hungary, and you would get a much better chance at some of the other borders if you wanted to be in a country which was less racist. In terms of the UK's reaction, the UK set up a Ukraine family scheme, which is extremely limited. If you are a British person or a settled person in the UK and you have a family member, you can apply to bring them into the UK for up to 3 years. That's very limited. Everywhere else in Europe, they're just actually, leaving aside the issue about the Black students, they're just opening their borders. Anybody coming out of Ukraine, because the English scheme doesn't recognize Ukrainians as asylum seekers or people fleeing persecution. It's only really offering family members some entry rights, which will obviously help some people. It'd be a limited offer. There is talk about having a local sponsorship scheme for Ukrainians, whereby individuals, communities, and local authorities can offer help to Ukrainians, but be down to those sponsors to house them, support them, and I suspect pay them to get here. But that's not in force yet, but it's just been talked about. Now that in no way meets the Temporary Protection Directive, which came into force in Europe on Friday, which, as I say, views all Ukrainians coming out, leaving aside the students, as potential refugees. So yet again, the UK is showing its racism towards not just Black people, but anybody who wishes to come here. Really. So I'm happy to answer questions on that. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Nadine. Don't forget, write your questions down, and after the next speaker, we'll have a session for questions. I think Nadine, Charlene White described the situation properly, because she says with all the chaos and the killing and all the harassment that's going on, they still have time for racism. So Okay, on that, could we move on to Luke? Luke, are you ready? The floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Frank. Thanks. Yes, I think, federation with the West Indies in some ways is linked to the broader discussion that's going on about borders because, we've faced situations in the region where we've had, although we've got CARICOM, which is supposed to be united influence in the Caribbean, where some countries have suffered some kind of discrimination in terms of movement of people. And I think in these times of climate change, which is introducing other pressures into the region in terms of hurricanes or droughts, flooding, we need to be much more flexible within the Caribbean for people to move. And I think the whole idea of federation that was about for a very long time, federation, has been around since around the 17th century at the time of pirates and buccaneers in the region. Some islands decided the best way they could actually protect themselves from attack was making some kind of alliances in terms of defending each other. So it's not a new idea. The idea has been around for a very long time. And I think it resurfaced again when it started to become a discussion around independence for the Caribbean islands. Some of the discussion, of course, was a top-down exercise because in some ways, the colonial master, the British, did not want to have to be dealing with different administrations. And I think they thought that, have some kind of federation would just consolidate things and make it easier for them in terms of administering and dealing with and so on. So they had their own interest in that. But that's not to say that there weren't some radical inputs into the whole idea of federation, because we know Marcus Garvey, T.A. Marichal from Grenada, Cipriani from Trinidad, they all got involved. Du Bois, even from America, got involved in this discussion about federation. And they saw it as a good thing for the region, for people to come together. I think one of the failings has been that there hasn't been enough discussion and movements with the peoples, with the masses, and that being explained to them. Some countries did better than others in terms of explaining what federation meant, why it was necessary, why they think was a good idea. Some undermined it for very personal reasons, and I won't get into, one from 10 leaves, 0 discussions now, but so there's been some opposition to the idea, and I think selfishly, the whole thing lasted about 4 years in the region before it collapsed. The Federation of the Experience, CLR James, did a whole lot going around the region, trying to make the point for federation, trying to encourage political movements and groups to join together so that they could actually be unity and strength. When the federation sadly collapsed, I think, the whole idea of CARICOM came about, which was more of a way of unifying for economic reasons rather than political. That movement has been with us, and it's had some benefits because there have been some corporations, some workings together, and some radical input has come out of the CARICOM in terms of people respecting sovereignty and so on in the region, especially when Venezuela was under severe attack. I think they united to say, respect Venezuela's sovereignty, and especially, these attacks coming from the north. But it's stagnating, and I think we need to open a discussion. CLS, when we were approaching our 40th birthday, we thought we'd try and hold a conference somewhere in the Caribbean to try and galvanize the left. And so we were looking around for ideas that might be the kind of material we might use for such a conference and getting what will remain of the left in the Caribbean to come together. I was in Barbados and was, lucky, fortunate to meet with George Lamming and had a little discussion about him and tell him, what our plans were. And he felt that federation was an issue that needed to be revisited. For me personally, it makes perfect sense that the region comes together. We've got one kind of common history, culture. Generally, it makes much more sense in come together to try and think about each other. Some places less fortunate than others in terms of resources and possibility of resources for development. There's some pluses and some islands, some regions, and so on. And I think if we could all come together, it could make the region, one of, a place where we could see vast development and hope for the people. And I think one of the problems we face continuously is the mass migration, of our young people and our brains leaving the region, continually looking for opportunity elsewhere. If we can make it possible for those opportunities to be developed within the region, coming up with solutions to the many problems that we face, we need to see the intellectuals getting more involved in this discussion. And that's why I think, it was important to put federation into this booklet that we're just producing, because we're faced with a real problem right now, as Steve mentioned, in Haiti with the wall going up. We've seen that wall go up in some ways at the airports during a period of, number of years. And some of those issues needs to be addressed by our politicians and by our thinkers in the region. For me, federation is an idea that we need to revisit. We need to put it on the agenda. We need to get talking. It's ridiculous that the working people or the working masses in the region are having to sustain a system of, embassy, a foreign minister, a that minister, all kinds of, for all the regions for all the countries in the region. And one way we could actually make some saving is by trying to consolidate the kind of things that we need to be doing in the region for our people, just coming together and discussing and working out. And, it's not easy, but because I think now that, we've had independence for a number of years, and some people are celebrating 40 years and 30 years independence, people have become accustomed to their borders or their region, feel that as a part of who they are, but, without thinking about the wider region. But, we need to be reminded that we're one people, mostly, coming from Africa, in the region. And I think consolidating the things that unite us rather than things that divide us is important in any discussion around federation and how we can move forward, especially when we're faced by the kinds of pandemics that's been going on and by the climate change that is likely to be coming our way some more. Okay, I think I'll stop there and take questions. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for that, Luke. I think it would have been easier for the Jamaican students that are trapped in Ukraine if they had looked around the Caribbean and used the University of the Caribbean. One of those things. Anyway, okay, now this is the time. Now, the three speakers, Steve Cushion, Nadine Wade, and Luke Daniels are now free to answer questions from the audience. If anyone has any question, could you just use the electronic hand or switch your camera on and wave, and we'll give you your turn as it comes along. Okay, is there any questions from the floor?
Frank, I think we had a question from Marilyn Moose. It's in the chat. Marilyn, if you'd like to ask your question, or we can ask it for you.
Okay, Marilyn, unmute and ask your question.
Okay. It's a very small question, actually. It's just, I'm not clear whether this government is, if you like, being doubly racist in excluding the rights of Ukrainians who live here without settled status from being able to bring in they're refugees who are members of their family, because that's certainly what appeared to be what they were saying originally.
Marilyn, if I can answer that, I didn't mention before, there are some people who've got pre-settled status who are allowed to bring people in. I doubt that many Ukrainians have pre-settled status, but there is a group of barristers who've formed an organization to give people individual advice and representation. If you know anybody, if you give me your email, I can tell you who to contact, because there's about 200 young barristers and solicitors who are offering free advice and representation to people who are confused about the scheme. Was there somebody, an individual? Because otherwise it is mainly people who are nationals or have got settled status, but the pre-settled status is probably too complex to describe here. There will be a few people on their way to settlement who will be able to bring people in.
I'm almost surprised how racist the government is being. As I said, they've had decades to rail against refugees who they just see as illegal migrants, despite all facts. So there's no way they're going to open the borders, which, because of what's happened in Europe, where borders are being opened, and I think even places like Poland, which is a really right-wing government, it just shows quite how bad the UK government is. Having said that, I think that in Scotland and Northern Ireland, there are moves to try and get more Ukrainians in. It is difficult because they really should just play by the UK's rules, but certainly Scotland is saying that they want to bring people in. I think if we demand anything, though, we should actually be demanding the right of all refugees. In particular, from Syria and Afghanistan at this point. Yeah.
There's a lot of people on the internet and campaigns doing that. It's a good demand.
Yeah.
But we do have an incredibly right-wing government. And we don't actually have an official opposition that's much better.
Thank you, Marilyn. We have Zanira's hands up. I hope I've pronounced that properly. Yes, you can unmute.
Good afternoon. It's Zenrina. Good afternoon. Greetings.
Okay.
My question is, there's a clip going around with the Ukrainian racism against Black people in the country and pushing them off the train, thinking they're not worthy to come on. And I'm thinking it's war. So, what is the government doing campaigning against that? You hear everything else on the news, but you don't see the news talking about what happened on the ground of racism with Black people who they're shoving off the train. What is it all about? It's war, and that's the time people should get together more than talking about color of your skin. It goes to show how rife racism is, because at the end of the day, it's a war. You forget all about color of skin and everybody get together, but it's happening. And I know you're the news, nobody, the government has done anything about it. And it's just left like the people are suffering as well. They're human beings, but that's what they call your skin. So something needs to be done. And I think that really, really awful, and I'm really deflated about it. We're talking about racism and it's happening in war. What's the sense of talking when there's no action and there's no campaigning to stamp it out? It's all right here on the platform talking about racism, this and racism, that. So what are you doing? Are you challenging the government? Thank you.
Can I say something? The European Union is actually taking action on that. Whether they are going to have any impact, there are meetings that happen on Friday and they're happening again tomorrow.
They should have impact. They should stamp it out. That's the impact it should have. Stop it. It's war. We don't want the war, and we don't want racism either.
Yeah, but it is I'm not sure who you want to. If you want to have impact, you're going to have to talk to the European Union. The UK has absolutely no role in this. But some of the EU, like the Fundamental Rights Agency, does have a role, and they need to be pushed into taking more action. I think some of them are going down. I know some of them are going down to the borders, for instance, and trying to intervene, because it's both sides of the borders. It's not just Ukraine, it's also places like Poland and Hungary, which are incredibly racist. And the people coming out of Ukraine who are Black are students, so they haven't got anybody much to help them either.
It's a shame. And why they're not having any news? Why they're not, transparency in the news? They talk about, a lot of people suffering, or look at Ukraine people. So about the other people who's been they're discriminated against. It's just not balanced. There's no balance to the situation. It's sad. It's very sad.
Have you looked at Al Jazeera? Because Al Jazeera has covered it more than the BBC. I don't really watch the BBC too much, but Al Jazeera is trying to deal with some of it at least.
Yeah. Steve may be able to shed some more light on it. And after Steve, then Luke can give you an answer to that. Go on, Steve.
I was just going to say that, the British state is inherently racist. The last Conservative coalition and Labour governments have just deeply implanted this racism, deeper than it was before in that state apparatus, particularly the police and the Home Office. So therefore, to expect the government to do anything to stamp out racism is unlikely to be successful. I think, and we have to recognise that the British government is part of NATO, which is not innocent in this in this war either. So, I would argue that we have to campaign against racism and for human rights, if you will, from below. I don't think we can do it. We can't rely on the state unless we force them, and that requires action from below. Now, there's one of the things that I think, and partly that's why we produced this pamphlet, actually, to argue against racism and to argue for a militant response to racism, and to argue for the unity of Black and white workers for the benefit of and the rights of all. Now, March the 19th, there is to be a big anti-racist demonstration in central London. I think there are other demonstrations in other cities in Britain. I think is one thing that we can do, is if we can get as large a turnout of our friends, our comrades, our workmates, our neighbours onto that demonstration, then I think that that will be an important step, and only one step, but it will be an important step.
Yeah, we've done all these steps, Steve. We've done all these steps. We do demonstration. We do everything already. As you rightly said, I agree with you. You did say the government is racist. So we're here talking to the calls come home, because nothing ain't gonna happen. So it's like talking now.
Can I say?
Okay, if I can comment,
I'm not going to give up.
Yeah. Okay. Zarina, I think what this whole incident has shown is also that the media is just an extension of the state. Anyway, Luke, could you?
Yes. I think what the whole thing is really, the whole issue that's being raised here is the importance really for the organization like Black Lives Matter movement. Clearly, we live in very racist societies, and just the whole reporting and the whole coverage of the news has just demonstrated how, white lives are more important than Black lives. If you notice when it's, a Black or brown country being destroyed by war, the kind of reporting that goes on, it doesn't get into those intimate details where you get, some commentators wanting to weep because it's a blue-eyed child and a blonde-haired child that's being killed. Makes a huge difference. So the whole nature of the reporting actually negates Black lives. And I think, the only way to fight racism is by being organized, getting out there, as Steve mentioned. We need to join those demonstrations and those movements that are fighting racism, fighting this racist government, and fighting others, and keep raising awareness about the damage that racism does to us all.
Yeah, but you need
Thanks.
to stamp out white privilege as well, because if you got white privilege, then obviously there's nothing gonna stop, because people are still sitting on the white privilege from slavery up till now. You know, I mean, if people want to, people who benefit from slavery is not stamping it out. They're getting the white privilege and they're sitting on it. So we forever year been battering, but you know, as the man said, don't give up, and suppose that we don't have to give up.
And that's
Yeah.
more important, why you should be out there demonstrating with people, because the government is not going to do it.
Yeah, I've done it
They gotta
so
be
many
pushed.
times, Frank, but I will be
Yeah.
out there in Portland in March. Yes, definitely.
Okay, all right. Should we move on to Halima? Halima has got a hand up. Could you ask your question?
I don't have a question. I just have an opinion and how I've been observing all of this. I just also would like to say, I can't see everyone, but I can see Nadine, Frank, and Luke Daniels. It's a privilege to be on this platform and Steve to be here. All of you have great points, and I agree with the previous sister, everything she said. But however, I'm somebody who come from a civil war, as a child, and the whole thing of what's happening in Ukraine really triggered me. So when the talks were starting, and America and Europe were saying, oh, they were putting in they were pushing NATO all around Russia, and Ukraine had all this support. I was against that. I'm from the war. I don't want no human being to be killed, even that God created. I'm anti-war. I understand what could do. No one wins. But also, what I find it shocking and devastating is to see, because I was following on what's going on Twitter, this doctor was sharing the Black Africans that were there to study how the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian people were throwing them on trains, and women and kids. And now I'm hearing 2 people died because of that situation. Imagine war. War doesn't have color. Like for me, it was a civil war, so it's a different experience. But you're facing a dictator regardless. But here's the Ukrainian people that not really showing no sympathy, those vulnerable people, and they see color. That's what really triggered me and gave me anxiety, because you're thinking about color while you're getting bombed. That says a lot, you know? And I just feel like the government was gaslighting Ukraine and saying they're going to do this and they're going to do that. I don't support NATO. I don't support Russia. I'm anti-war, anti-racist. And for someone like me, it's heartbreaking to see that, who understands no one wins at the end of the day. I know I'm all over the place. But yes, you can push back. And yeah, campaigning does help. I agree with Steve, what he was saying, that about stand up to racism, but also I'm angry. I'm a Labour member and Labour campaigner, that my leader, Keir Starmer, is terrorizing and attacking anybody who is supporting anti-war. He just removed Diana Abbott, and she removed herself from Stop the War. She's also the president of Stand Up to Racism. And it just shows that, you know, we have people who claim they care about human rights and they care about democracy, and we should all go behind this leader, but he's attacking the first thing as a human right you should do. You should have sympathy, you should care about peace and welcome peace. And those who's doing it, who's trying to show awareness of what's happening in Ukraine, he's removing them. He's cancelling MPs. If you attend Stand Up to Racism, Stand Up Stop the War, he would remove them. He's also threatening, like, he's going to remove the whip. So it just is confusing for me. It's emotional. But what I find that campaigning and awareness does help, because even that, if those people from Ukraine were not recording and sharing those footages on Twitter and social media, we would not know what happened. And a lot of people start writing to the UN, South Africa Embassy, I think it's Windrush lawyers, another South Windsworth Councillor, Caribbean Councillor, and he start contacting Hackney Stand Up to Racism, Tower Hamley Stand Up to Racism. He start, health organizations, and they wrote letters and statements to embassies and the UN. And that's how, it did help, because we're talking about it. We're talking about this platform. So I do hope campaigning and demonstrations do change stuff. I support down Steve. I'm talking a lot, I'm all over the place, but I'm just saying that no one wins, and we need to do something about the leaders. We need to hold accountable for the Tories party and the Labour Party, because they're both in the same hand. And a lot of people think Labour is for the people, it's for the poor, it's for the ethnic community, and it's not. This leader, Keir Starmer, he's not for Black people or Muslim people. So I'm going to stay quiet now. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Halima. It was a contribution rather than a question. So thank you for that anyway. Marsha, your hand is up. You can unmute and speak.
Good morning. Well, it's morning where I am. Good evening to you guys.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for this very insightful panel. I just wanted to ask Luke, in terms of the idea of federation, I am also very open. And I also agree that, you know, as Caribbean people with a shared history and a shared oppression and shared many other things, we should be much more further along our trajectory of trying to live together and trying to live in an integrated way. But there is a way in which those of us who live outside of the Caribbean, those of us with the transnational experience, think of that or experience that as much more possible than people who still live within the Caribbean. We still have those colonial relics and tendencies of thinking of ourselves in segregated ways. And so coming out of even what some of the other speakers were saying just now in terms of, you know, this world being very reluctant to change at the level of international leadership, Western leadership, so on and so forth, I'm reflecting on us as Caribbean people, us as Black people, and how we ourselves have to change in order to get ourselves closer to where we need to be. Not that the burden of the change is going to be on us, but the reality is that we have an important part to play. So I just wanted to know, in your reflections about federation, how you were looking at the relics that we still live with as Caribbean people and how we can change those to be able to get a different result this time around or the next time around.
Thank you very much, Marsha, for your question. I think, you know, it's a big one and one we've been grappling with, and we will continue to grapple with it. I think some of the action has to happen in the Caribbean. We have to get those like-minded people together who can champion this cause. And I think we in the diaspora, we've got opportunity in some ways of uniting people in a way, because we work and we cooperate together very well in London, and I don't see why, well, and in other metropoles, I don't see why we can't do the same in the region. I think the collapse of the Grenada Revolution has damaged the left, you know, almost mortally in the Caribbean, and I think is how do we start to get people to have a perspective that is different from the one that the neoliberals are pushing in the region at the moment. And I still think we might be tempted to see if we can actually organize some kind of a conference sometime in the Caribbean to look at this issue, to see who will support it, who will come out. And obviously for it to work, you know, as I said earlier on, I think it's got to be a grassroots movements led. People have got to understand what it's about. But I think the conditions in the world at the moment might actually be pushing us in that direction in many ways. I think the whole pandemic, the COVID pandemic that recently swept through the region will demonstrates that we need to work together to solve these problems. I mean, Cuba has been outstanding in the region in terms of developing its own vaccine and sharing it with people in the region. You know, and I think there's some really good forces in the region that we can work with. And of course, the whole idea of federation needs to be included in Haiti and other countries that, you know, not usually seen as being part of the Caribbean. You know, we really expand our vision of the Caribbean to include the Americas and, you know, those regions that have that connection with us. You know, Brazil is one of the countries with, you know, the most Black people in outside of Africa, you know, and so we need to be building those alliances with even not only with the islands, but the whole region, and we can be a force in the region. But we need to have those discussions. We need to have the intellectuals in the region, from the university, from other places, working to undermine this neoliberal approach that is, for me, sucking the life out of the Caribbean region. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marsha. I think some of the relics that you were talking about, we actually call them our leaders, you know, and I think those are some of the things we need to get rid of, you know. I mean, right now, I've got a lot of time and respect for Mia Motley, and I just wish that some of our leaders, you know, would go along. I know she has come out strongly in favor of sovereignty of the country, but I think maybe she came out too early with that.
She might be the biggest relic of all, but I will not spoil your admiration.
Well, there you go. You see, as I said, some of our leaders are relics, and those are what we need to get rid of. Yes. I see there's no more questions from the floor, or the whole thing was so well that there's no need to question. But anyway, it is a booklet that we are going to be publishing, or will publish. The camera is a bit fuzzy, and this will be available through the Caribbean Labor Solidarity publishing. So if when you see us, we'll have a table, and you know, you can buy the books from that, or you can apply or write to us through the website, CLS UK, and you know, we can arrange something for you to get, for some way of you getting it. Yes. So over
if I can just say a little bit before we close the meeting. I think one of the things I wanted to report on is some of the activities that we were engaged in this last month. I see Steve's hand is up, and he'll come in and say some more. But two things that I was engaged with, and one was about saving the National Health Service. It was a nationwide campaign, but we had the Islington groupings came together, a number of groups came together to have a rally, and which we did in the park. In which park was it again? It's just by Highbury Corner, Highbury Fields. We had Jeremy Corbyn there as one of our speakers. I see the press actually did a very good report on it in the Tribune, in the local press, because people argued that the NHS needs 20 billion for it to survive, to function well. We were out campaigning. I was wearing one of my hats as executive member for the deputy chair for Islington Pensioners Forum. And so I spoke at the meeting. And the other campaign I was involved in, and I think Omar might say a little bit about this, we already did Immigration and Borders demonstration as well. So just those two. Omar? No, sorry, Steve's got his hand up there first. Let's see. Sorry, Frank, I'm behaving as our chair in front of you.
You are the chair. That's yeah, there it is. This is our booklet. This will be available. It's on the press right now, and from tomorrow it will be available.
Right.
So yeah.
Steve, you need to unmute.
Steve, you're muted, Steve.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. Cost £2, including postage. You can, if you send an email to, well, you can send it to me that you've got the Zoom link here from, or you can send it to info@CLS, whichever. We can arrange for you to work out how you pay for that. But we're also now is the time to that your subscriptions, your annual subscriptions to Caribbean Labour Solidarity are due. If you go to the website, then you can see. Hang on, what am I doing here? If you go to the website, I'm gonna
share it.
There.
That's it.
Steve, you're muted again.
You've gone muted again, Steve. You mute, Scott. That's it. Go ahead.
Sorry, it won't let me share and speak at the same time for some reason. It just shut me up. I don't blame it really. Just to say that if you go to the website, you can join Caribbean Labour Solidarity. You get a free copy of the pamphlet, and you will be more than welcome to join. We need a few shillings to maintain our activities, and so that will be a great deal of help. But get in contact with us, and you'll get a copy of the pamphlet one way or another. Thank you.
Thank you. Raphael. Go, Ralph. You're unmute and speak.
Frank, I've known you for about 10 years and you still can't pronounce my name. Okay. You can call me Raph, okay, as Raphael is too complicated for you.
Mr. Andrews.
Not Andrews, please, not Andrews. No, please, no. Steve said half of what I was going to say because it was about the membership. Just to also mention Denot as well, who's done an excellent job of preparing a new membership thing for us, which is a welcome thing for new members. So if you want to apply, you can apply for membership. Go on the CLS website. That will tell you how to do it. It's very, very good. I mean, I'm not trying to sell it to you, but for what you're getting for the membership is extremely good. But not only that, it helps keep us going because it brings in the coppers that we can do Zoom and we can contact you and we can make publications like what Stevie's told you about. And not only that, but as a special offer, we're going to be, if you're joining now, you're going to be getting the book, which is going to be available, which is Steve has just advertised. So that's a really good reason to join and become a member. So there you go. And it don't cost you very much. It's a very reasonable price. So thank you very much.
Yeah. And you can see from that contribution, he's our treasurer. So, Omar, you got something to say about the...
Yeah, hi, yeah, thank you very much for that, Raf, and for all the information this afternoon. It's definitely worth joining us because we're doing a lot of work with a lot of other groups to basically fight the Nationality and Borders Bill. As Luke said, last weekend we attended a protest from the Home Office to Westminster Square, basically against the Nationality and Borders Bill. Jeremy Corbyn turned up at the very, very end to offer a speech in solidarity, and we had a lot of community groups from various religions and basically ethnic backgrounds, from the Sikh community, the Muslim community, Jewish Voice for Labour, ourselves, Caribbean Labour Solidarity, PCS Union, Stop the War movement. Loads of groups combined to basically march against this very racist and offensive piece of legislation. Obviously, it moved into the next stages the day after, on the 28th of February. But it's very important for us to keep up a presence against such archaic legislation. On top of that, I've also got to keep an eye on the police crime sentencing and courts bill, which is also another attack on our democratic rights. It's currently also moving through the halls of Westminster, and is one that we've got to keep an eye on because they're seeking to limit your ability to even protest, which, as we all know, is a democratic right within itself. So we must keep an eye out for both of these things. We will keep you updated as we go on, various activities that we're partaking in. We also will be attending the Stand Up to Racism march on the 19th of March. And as it's already been mentioned, we'd encourage everybody to come out in your droves. It's on UN Anti-Racism Day and is a key date in the calendar for all of us to basically pound the pavement and defend our democratic rights. So thank you. That's what I wanted to say.
So thank you, Omar. I did see David Horsley on here, and also Claudia, and that reminded me that we did go to the memorial for Claudia Jones on her birthday at the Marx Memorial, at actually the graveside of Marx, because Claudia is buried in the same ground as same place as Marx. So we actually went and we sent a delegation to that memorial. David, I saw your hand was waving frantically. So if you'd like to come on there, unmute and come in.
Yeah, I'm a frantic person, Frank. First of all, on the point you just made, I really I want to thank the delegation from CLS to come along to Highgate in the most atrocious kind of freak weather that Saturday. Many thanks CLS for attending with your wonderful banner. I think it's been a really interesting, positive meeting today. I'm not good with names. A sister who spoke about racism in the Ukraine and about her disgust at Keir Starmer forcing Labour MPs to step aside, from the Stop the War platform. Very, very. You said to Stephen, maybe you were muddled. To me, you were not muddled. You said everything very clearly, sister. So, but I'm looking forward to reading the book. The trio who wrote it. Well done for you. Thank you very much. It's a big deal, and I think it's very good having three different people giving these very different, well, not different, they've got but broad perspectives on the issue. So basically, that's it. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Dave. And we go to Jamaica again. It's Paul. Go ahead, Paul. You've got the floor.
I think I'm unmuted. Yeah, you can hear me. I just noticed a comment on the chat about the Caribbean left being in disarray. Now, I just wonder whether Steve or somebody could give a plug for what you'd put on the website, because that could be a way of challenging the disarray. I only read your advert for the meetings, so perhaps Steve or somebody who could say a bit more about it. I think starts, is it next week, week after?
Okay. Yes. To answer that, the Society for Caribbean Studies, the Socialist History Society, and the Institute of Commonwealth Studies are having 3 evening research seminars on the history of socialism in the Caribbean. We've got 9 speakers all told, so each night we'll have 3. We've got an interesting array of speakers ranging from a couple of postgraduate students from the University of the West Indies, a professor from the University of Warwick, the political officer of the Trinidad Oil Workers Union, and a representative of a Trinidad women's organisation, and so on. So it's going to be a very broad range, and I will circulate everyone who's at this meeting, who's registered, with the details of that, and you're all more than welcome. The format is going to be, we've asked all of the speakers to write a full paper on their topic, and then just to present it, and the full paper will be available to all those who register if they're interested in reading it. Thank you, Paul, for reminding me.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay.
One more thing, Frank, if I can just quickly mention that I also attended the funeral for Sarah White this week, and some of you may remember she was one of the organizers of the Black Book Fair in London for many years, and so great supporter of the bookshop in Blackstock Road, the New Beacon Bookshop. She's been an anti-racist campaigner and has supported our movement in many, many ways. And it was a great loss to our community. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. Okay. Thanks.
Good. Is there any other contribution from the floor, or? Yep, that being it, I think that I can safely hold the meeting to a close.
Raf had a question. He just put a question to Luke.
Okay, Raf. Unmute and put your question.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, just question to Luke briefly regarding his very eloquent explanation of federation. Does he think that maybe we should try a different approach, in that instead of looking at the issue of federation, maybe we should do what McDonald's do and remarket it and brand it and call it something else, and maybe say, instead of calling it federation, call it, you know, Unity Day or something, and see if we can sell it to people in the Caribbean that way. Because instead of telling them that it's going to be federation and they say, well, we don't want it here, maybe if they talk about, well, having Unity Day, they might be more interested in it. I mean, I don't know. It's a suggestion. What do you think of that?
Unmute, Luke. You've got to unmute.
I was happily talking to myself there, Frank. Come on.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually like the idea of federation, or the word federation. I think it would probably look very different from how it was conceived in the past. But I think the whole idea of people come together, and of course a name change is always something can happen. But people have also got some idea of what federation means. If we try and rebrand, I think will take a lot of time. But having those discussions, I think that maybe a couple of conferences, a couple of meetings, everything should be up in the air, you know, and renaming it is not something that, you know, is written in stone. But I personally feel, you know, a bit attached to the idea of federation, or to that concept. But I think it will look very different from what it was in the past. But I will come out of discussion. But thanks for your comment there, Raphael. Thank you.
Yeah, it's all about walls now, putting up walls. I think we should be tearing walls down and going back to the unity we once had. Because I mean, I don't know if it's to do with, since Trump started to talk about his wall, that everyone else is talking about walls. I mean, Haiti and the Democratic Republic of Dominica. I mean, or the Republic of Dominica. That's crazy. And I mean, they've got the walls in Israel, but that's not a border wall. That is a wall because it's not on the border between Israel and the Palestinians. It's just a wall that's been put up on the Palestinian land. So you can't really call that a border wall, but it's a wall. But we should be breaking walls down. We shouldn't be building walls. You know, I see your hands going back up, Paul. Or is that a historical hand, or you just put it up?
Yeah, hi. Yeah. No, it's a current hand. It's a current hand.
It's a current, okay.
Now
you're breaking up. I must say you're breaking up. You're breaking up.
Again. Last week, breaking up. I'm on your
Yeah,
internet. It's still breaking up. That's not good.
That's it. That's better. Speak if you
I'll speak up. Maybe that might make a difference. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No. In terms of Raphael, your comment about federation, and also Luke, of course. Last week, Friday, or was it the one before? In Jamaica, we have a Jamaica Day. So maybe what we need to promote is the idea of a Caribbean Day, because I've never heard of such a thing taking place here. And I think I've said before, federation isn't really on the agenda in Jamaica at all. In fact, there's a resistance against it. I think some of it, in terms of oil prices, it's often said that Trinidad has unfair advantage in terms of manufacture over a place like Jamaica. Because of the cheaper oil makes production cheaper. But anyway, the idea just struck me that we have a Jamaica Day. Maybe we need to promote a Caribbean Day. Might get the thing on the agenda a bit more.
That makes true sense. That makes a lot of sense. But it's,
If I-
again,
if
it's
I-
the same thing that broke it down in the first place. You know, one country thinking it's going to rest more on my shoulders rather than the whole show, you know, but we've got to have the attitude of we are our brother's keepers, you know.
If I could just piggyback on that idea of the days, I mean, which I love, but I think as well that there is a way in which the softer issues, if you will, you know, we discuss in the Caribbean, the economic issues and the revolutionary issues and, you know, softer issues like the relations between man and woman and how we treat women and so on. We create these separations. But I think as well, Caribbean love in the diaspora has a lot of lessons for Caribbean integration. So in the Caribbean, you know, Barbadians stay on Barbados and they have intimate relations, Grenada, Guyana, so on. But when we come into the diaspora spaces, we're just relieved to find any other Caribbean person to have a relation with. How do we break down the barriers at that most intimate level? What can that teach us about breaking down the barriers across societies? I'm thinking as we're continuing the discussion, have we written enough about Caribbean diasporic love? What are the lessons? You know, I think those are some of the things that can also offer solutions.
Yep, that is very, very, very good, which is a fact. I've grown up with people I don't even know where they're from. You know, it doesn't really matter to me, you know, and it doesn't matter to them where I'm from. You know, and I think that is something that we can export, I suppose. Yeah. What's your views on that, Luke?
Yes, we can. You know, I actually think the other word for me is very coinable as a kind of Caribbean. What's the word I was saying? Like how there's a Pan-Africanist new movement. You know, I think we should have that kind of pride about the Caribbean and promoting and thinking about, you know, the impact of the Caribbean thinkers over the period. You know, we've done tremendously amount of stuff from the time of independence and even before. Produce such outstanding music and art and culture, you know, and everything that you can think about, you know. And certainly, we're not short of political thinkers and academics, and our region can be a beacon really in the world if we really put our heads to it and work at lifting, you know, and would be a great example for many places. There's so much we have to offer. And I'm a great Caribbeanist. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've done the subject to death. I think we should move on. And we've got no more meetings, nothing to advertise. So I think that's about time I say that I thank you for coming. And I hope you'll be here with us again next month, first Sunday of the month, 2 o'clock, etc. So are you saying goodbye, Aisha, or you want to
I had
ask?
something to add. Okay. I came here in January and I missed the last month's meeting. We have, so Brother Luke came to our solidarity meeting, one of our meeting in January, isn't it? We're sort of a problematic group. We haven't got much of a focus and we do need help. And the recent development has been, we managed to, so we're an inter-union group and mainly focusing on the discrimination that we face from the union. And we're sort of getting off the ground. And so I come to here, I go to African Congress, and just to update you on the RMT Black members, they've had some success. I don't know if you know Mel Mullins and so on and so forth. They were able to get one of their RMT leaders to delete the Twitter account. There was a endorsement of blackening of faces kind of scandal, and it is being reported in time. So that's good to see how, as Black members of the union, how they're succeeding in tackling the union discrimination. But it's been, what I've been doing is connecting the people. We are struggling with the focus. The recent group that we connected is a number of Labour members who have been expelled, and they feel quite disaffected, but that has brought problems to the group. Some members are a bit disruptive. So I don't really want to even advertise our WhatsApp group. But however, on a positive note, this Thursday, we have a meeting where we have Sister River Olivia Rose. She will talk about women with conviction, working chances. And I think that sounds quite refreshing, because usually, you know, International Women's Day, people tend to focus on successful women. I think it'd be really good to give voices to women who are overlooked. Most of our group members in WhatsApp who are not very active are actually academics. However, our reach is broadening. Another person who's not even on the poster is a security officer sister. So I think it's about, you know, giving voices to the people who don't, like myself, who are, you know, set at desk job and don't have a voice. And then we also have an academic and anti-racist ally that we found that within UCU, an academic union, discrimination is rife. So she was one of the few people to speak up. So she will be there. And best of all, we're being led by a fantastic young leader. And I hope you'll come and see her, Amira Campbell, Birmingham Black Voices student leader. And I think she's just an exceptional talent. So if you want to come to somewhere that is a bit humble, not many people attend, then do come and help us out. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you for that, Aisha.
Thank you for that. I should also do a little plug for my meeting tomorrow. Marcia, it was great to hear you speaking there, and I look forward to our session tomorrow. And it's on at 10 o'clock our time. So 6 o'clock Barbados time, 10 o'clock in the UK, and it's celebrating International Women's Day. So there'll be a conversation with Marcia and with there's somebody else that I can't think of her name at the moment. I haven't met, but yes, we'll be talking about domestic violence in the region.
Yeah, I'll get to you in a minute, Halima. But for Aisha, you're in good hands. Mel Mullins is one of the rising stars of RMT.
Yeah,
right?
she's taking over from Brother Glenroy, who is just amazing. I turn up every Sunday for a couple of minutes just to see them. I really like going to African Congress. Yeah.
Yeah, because as far as the RMT is concerned, the incident she was talking about, we've just had a new assistant general secretary who saw the picture of Trudeau with the black face when he blacked up his face 4 years ago. And he says, you know, he actually said he's actually still laughing at the picture. He found it so funny, ha ha ha, you know. And this is assistant general secretary that we have been accusing him of racism for years, and now he's come out with this. And when we brought it to the attention of the general secretary, he just suddenly the Twitter account just disappeared, and instead of the general secretary acting, he's wrote to Mel, who wrote the letter complaining that that's not the way you do a complaint. You have to send it, you've got a channel to put the complaint. So we're taking it forward in other ways. Yeah, Halima, you've got something to say? The floor is yours, but...
Thank you. Yeah, for Aisha, Sister Aisha, I just wanted to add on your wonderful event. Please remember carers, as I'm a carer, and also the NHS workers, doctors from all different colours who passed away for COVID, for saving lives, and carers who are still working, porters and cleaners. I just hope you can remind them, and 1 minute silence for all those people who died for COVID. I would add on that because I might not join in that event, but all the best. I'm wishing you solidarity, sister. Take care.
If I can come back with that, Sister Halima is spot on. One of the things happens is you get brown or white or whatever people, director of this institute and that institute, speaking on the behalf of the low paid workers. And unless you, for example, I was working on the outsource campaign, unless you were working with them, and better to get them to speak. One of our rising stars in this network has been Brother Akish. He's a security officer at King's. They did have their outsourced victory, but for example, at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, people who are self-isolating were being bullied, because unless the workers speak from themselves, we don't know, because it wasn't about giving them money. It was actually about who's going to pay their employer? You needed to also pay them, unless if they don't do the billable hours. That's what's happening to people. Their children were getting ill. They were, upset, crying, and yet when they came back into work, they were being bullied. They weren't being tested the same number of times. And this is an institution that was on SAGE, and that's why Brother Akish, for example, the racism at Unison, for example, at King's College London, didn't even tell him he's allowed facility time, free time to do his work. Don't give him the membership. Don't, our brothers want to go and, interrogate management, a bit like the RMT black members. But, people like myself, our colleagues are seen as inferior. So, they're not that, the white office workers get to go to high level meetings and they're left out. So I think this inter-union, which I'm having difficulty explaining to people, and we're struggling, but it is making a difference, and he's now getting invites to other branches meeting. And like myself, he likes public speaking. So we are making a difference. Yeah, Sister Halima is spot on. I think these forums need more people like ourselves.
Good. Thank you very much. And we just stretched the meeting on a little bit. So there being no more contribution, I think we'll thank you for coming again, and we'll have to close the meeting now. Thank you very much. Good. See you.
Well done to our speakers. Well done, guys.
Yeah.
Well done, Frank.
Ooh.
Do we want to hang about for a few minutes?
Okay. Slightly. Oh, I should have. I'll have to get GAC to affiliate to